Good morning. Welcome to the morning meeting. Sean, Dan, Mark here with you to run you through the day with the presumption of grace, peace, love, and understanding for all the latest news and information, traffic, news, weather on the ones, and a surprise cooking segment at the end. We'll be making fondue. Not the best dish to make on a two-way, I concede, but Sean has a recipe. It's got beef and chocolate.
Passed down from grandma.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome in. Thank you for watching. If you're here on the two-way platform, raise them up. Yellow hands, let them fly like flags in the wind. And if you're new to the platform, you've never raised your hand, I feel like today's your lucky day. Please raise your hand. If you're watching on some other platform, also welcome in. I got a text yesterday from one of my friends who watched the evening show where we did this great focus group with some Gen Zers on Elon Musk and Doge. Apparently, the chat on YouTube was just a sewer, just hostility galore. And so I'm recommending we shut down the chat. Just kidding. We love to let you vent. Thank you for coming. Here's what's happening today all around the nation and the world, brought to you by Palmolive. Palmolive. Donald Trump, nothing on his public schedule till 3, but as we tell you day after day, there could be 100 events between now and 3. But in theory, he doesn't start public events till 3, where he hosts a reception honoring one of his favorite holidays, Black History Month. That's at 3. That is listed as open to pre-credentialed media. Wonder if the Associated Press will be allowed in. Then he leaves the White House at 7 for the National Building Museum. If you've ever been there, one of Washington's great spaces. And there he is going to deliver remarks to a meeting of the Republican Governors Association. All the governors are in town of both parties, at least the ones who choose to come. The governors' organizations have declined in influence over the last 30 years, in part because the Republicans have soured on them because they thought the staffs were too liberal of both the NGA and the RGA. But a bunch are in town, and the president will speak to them at 7:20, and then he'll
Mark,
go
is
back to
he
the White
speaking
House.
at 7:20? Is he speaking the NGA or I thought it was the RGA.
RGA, it's the RGA, but the NGA is in town too.
Right.
This is the time of year when they
Yeah,
come.
that's why they both
Yeah.
sides do that.
1 o'clock, we get a rare treat, too rare for some tastes, where Caroline Levitt will brief, and she'll be joined by unnamed SAOs, which, as Sean well knows, stands for Senior Administration Officials, although identified in the schedule as Senior White House Officials. So I don't know what that's about, who those people are, but we'll be watching. And once again, I ask prediction, will that be carried live? How many cable news channels will carry that live? Dan?
All of them.
Sean?
All at the beginning. I mean,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
million-dollar question is who cuts away?
Yeah. All right. Who cuts away first? How about that? I'm guessing
MSNBC.
MSNBC. All right. Easy question. Fine. CPAC today. Speaker Johnson speaking at 10 a.m. The Vice President of the United States speaks.
No. JD speaking at 10.
Yeah, JD's at 10. The speaker's later. 10 o'clock, it's on C-SPAN, and you can probably watch it a million other places. You don't need to have great sources to know. This will be a barn burner. This will be the third of Vance's speech in a week that will set down a template that you will not believe. So I recommend you make time. As soon as we're off the air, tune over to that. I'm going to go to the Stairmaster and watch it on the Stairmaster because I don't want to miss it. At some point, maybe it's already happened. I don't know exactly when it is. General Kellogg, the president's special envoy to the Ukraine-Russia matter, who wasn't in Saudi Arabia, is in Kyiv today, and he and Zelensky are apparently going to have a press conference. That'll be pretty interesting.
Nice.
Watch the body language for that. In the House is out again this week. The Senate is in. Around noon, they plan to confirm Kash Patel to be the head of the FBI. At some point today, Dick Durbin, according to Politico, I couldn't find reference to this, but Politico says Dick Durbin is doing a protest outside the FBI building today. History will long record that thing. Well, I'm
I
curious
think people
about
are waiting to see if that guy's going to run. There are a lot of rumors he's not going to run
Dick
for another
Durbin.
term.
Yeah, but that's not a seat Republicans could win, I don't think. Be interesting, though, to see who goes for it. Michelle Obama will not run for it. All right. After the Senate dispatches the Patel matter, they're having votes on the reconciliation amendments. Sean, it's something called a vote-a-rama. Could you schoolhouse rock that in about a paragraph? What's a vote-a-rama, Sean?
Well, that's when they put a bunch of ornaments on a Christmas tree and dispense with several amendments to try to kill time.
I mean, it means anyone can offer an amendment for I forget what the duration is for this one, 30 hours or whatever. So,
I think it's 40 on the Senate if it's not. Oh God, yeah.
So what you do, I mean, just to give people a sense of the politics of this, if you're in the minority, you will offer amendments that you know the other side does not like. They're going to vote them down, but they're going to pay a political price. So you try to gin up things that are uncomfortable, and Republicans will do it to Democrats potentially too a little bit. But the whole point of these things, and the reason they don't happen much, is you go on the record with a lot of votes that you probably don't want to.
And the great irony of it for me is it's everything real people care about Washington or hate about Washington, but it's being done to try to win the hearts and minds of real people. Ah, ridiculousness. All right. Hey, can we dip into Fox for a second? I see Senator Langford is on there talking about Doge. Let's just see. Bring that up if you can. Anyway, bunch of new polls out in the last
Years later,
40.
we're cutting government size and we're opening up American energy. Dramatic difference between side by side in first month.
Okay, so Elon Musk is the lead blocker on this play. Here he was with Sean last night on
All right, forget this. Forget this. We'll come back to Musk in a minute.
I really want to
A bunch of new polls out. A bunch of new polls. They're all the same. They're all telling the same story roughly and pretty closely. Washington Post, CNN, Gallup, Quinnipiac, Dan, right?
Yep.
Quinnipiac?
Yep.
And Reuters. They all show the president's support is not cratering, but it's down. And Musk is not particularly popular. And a bunch of the things the president's doing, people are concerned about. As with all our polls in our polarized society, Republicans love it, Democrats hate it. But he's doing worse with independents now than he was before. Let's not overstate the case. His approval rating is still higher than it was at any point during his first term in these polls. As I said, his support hasn't cratered. But the context in which we're now going to talk about Zelensky, the House and Senate reconciliation, unreconcilables, and about spending, CPAC, all this is in the context of the president's poll numbers being down. Now, there's no election coming up anytime soon, so it doesn't matter all that much, but it is a significant context in which to discuss this. So, guys, let's start with Zelensky. Big story yesterday. The president said a lot of negative things, called him a dictator. Europe's freaking out. Richard Haass is freaking out. Some people attribute Donald Trump, Sean, saying Zelensky's a dictator, calling him a two-bit actor, all these things, to just his peak and his temperament. Others say there's some strategy here. What is it? Why is he saying negative things about our ally, who America has championed and supported for years now?
I mean, I don't think it's that complicated. Zelensky talked smack about Trump, called him some names, didn't buy into the deal that Bessett went over there for him. And there's been a lot of talk. I mean, Tucker Carlson, among others, have been leading this charge that there's Zelensky canceled elections. Therefore, by any Democratic standards, that's in their opinion, just to be clear, the definition of a dictator. And I think now Trump's like, great, you don't want to do business with me, I'm going to brand you. I think,
but again, Sean, is it just tit for tat, or is there some U.S. interest served by this?
Well,
some people say
US,
he's laying the groundwork for a deal that Zelensky
right,
won't
and that's
like.
what I was going to get to. Is that I think ultimately his view is I'm going to soften you up because I'm going to come in at a deal, and I don't want you to have any hand in that deal. Like, you're going to have to take my deal, and if I soften you up to the point where I offer you a deal that seems palatable, then you can't politically not accept that deal, right? So I'm going to knock you around a bunch. You're going to be politically weak, and then I'm going to hand you a deal, and you can't not accept it because you'll have been weakened by me.
Dan, what do you think of Sean's analysis? Hint, it's
It
good.
would be great because that's usually how you negotiate with the other side, not your ally. I mean, to me, this is not the art of the deal. It's the art of the fire sale. I mean, he wants a deal so badly that he is telegraphing out loud a deal for a deal's sake. He basically gave away a whole bunch of stuff before this started, right? Negotiating chips. And he is trashing. I agree with you, Sean. He is softening up Zelensky, smacking him around to say, take it. If you were selling your house and you went out and said, I want to sell my house. The house is falling apart. It's old. It's dirty. I'll pay your closing costs. I'll pay every expense you have. If you were the buyer, you'd say, we have a live one. I'm going to lowball them. I'm going to come in and I'm going to try to get this thing for, 30 cents on the dollar. To me, it is unbelievable that Trump is basically, I agree with you, Sean, he is trashing Zelensky to shove it down his throat. And I think I go back to yesterday. it is not that he is trying to get a deal. I think all Americans agree with that, and so does like even the Richard Haas's of the world. I think where the Journal and yours truly and some Democrats have a concern is, like, how are you going about this? And you look so desperate that it's not necessarily in our interest, but we'll see.
I think the other thing is, look,
Go
the overarching point of this is Trump prides himself on the fact that for 4 years, there wasn't a war, a foreign incursion, et cetera, under his watch. And that if he can get the world back to that state and say, you know what, Joe Biden, right when you took office, your Afghanistan failure allowed this to occur. Your other weak, feckless policies allowed the incursions into, Gaza, et cetera. And I'm the one who righted the ship. That's ultimately what he seeks, is a safer, so to him, it's about the end state.
But I mean, it's just like when we withdrew from Afghanistan and we told everyone.
No, depends on what happens on the ground. It might be, but it depends on what happens on the ground.
Hold on, let me finish. We announced we were leaving. We started polling at, we telegraphed everything, right? And Biden was appropriately and rightfully criticized that how you went about this was horrific. What Trump is doing is telegraphing, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. But Mark,
he might be bluffing. Depends on what happens, Dan.
But hold on a sec, because you keep saying the point that at the end of the day, the deal is a secure Ukraine, that Russia does not take more land or stuff, right? We have not heard Trump say that.
It's got. Let's see what the deal is. There's the coverage. The coverage is so biased against Trump and for the establishment. Therefore, the Richard Haas European leader point of view. So American public opinion matters a ton on this, and it's not in any story you read. Let me just make 2 more points. I'll throw it back to you. Second, there are all these stories that call Trump's claim that this wouldn't have happened on his watch baseless. Well, it's not baseless because it didn't happen on his watch. So you could say, had Trump won re-election, Putin would have gone in, but the balance of the evidence is no, he wouldn't, because he didn't for 4 years, even though he did it under Trump's predecessor and Trump's successor. And finally, I'll say the people who are decrying Trump's destruction of the old order not only got us Putin invading, the old order got us the inability to get him out. Europe and the United States, working with Zelensky, tried for years to get him out. Why couldn't we? Even it's a gas station with nuclear nukes. We couldn't get him out because the old order is feckless. So people who are decrying Trump's destruction of the old order, you don't have the old order brought us this, and you don't have a plan to end the war. Any plan to end the war will reward a murderous dictator. That's the only way the war is going to end. So you're going to have to price that in. There's 2 things that have to happen. The war has to end. And Ukraine and Europe have to be confident that whatever is in place, Putin can't take more territory than is agreed to under the deal. Dan, if the deal, both as it's announced and as it's enforced, doesn't do that, Trump will be an historic failure. He will be an historic failure. But if the deal does that, it'll be a spectacular. So it's too soon to say. But I can tell you this: Marco Rubio and the National Security Advisor, Mr. Waltz, they don't want a deal that has them in the history books as losing Europe.
But Mark, the only thing is, I would feel better with what Trump is doing if he just said what you said, which is our red line, our bottom line is that Putin
he can't say it now, but I don't care what he says now. I just care about the deal securing Europe. I don't care what he says now. Dan, he's making a deal with a guy who is a mass murderer, who violated every norm, who should
that's my point, Mark.
but that's the only way to end the war. So he can't say everything.
Mark, it's not A or B. There's a giant in the middle. Like, you don't give the farm away. He is the
farm. Sean, go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, Sean.
Respectfully, Dan, that's exactly, I think, the point that Mark, and I feel like someone hacked my talking points this morning. What deal? What deal? Right now, for 4 years, you guys did not. I mean, not you guys. I apologize. That's not fair. The Biden administration did nothing. It did zero. It didn't try to have a meeting. Trump comes in and says, I want to end the killing. I want to end the war. And this is the way I want to do it. And everyone goes, oh, we don't like who's sitting at the table. You know what I care about? End results. That's all I care about. And everyone wants to talk about what color tie he's wearing and whether or not he had a hat on and whether or not it's appropriate and following norms and traditions and the AP style book guide of honorifics. To me, I care about the bottom line. And if you don't like the deal in a week or 2 weeks, that's fair. Criticize it and say that that's not fair. But right now, you're the godfather of the process, issue on the Democrats. When it comes to domestically, just follow the same advice internationally, which is stop worrying about how Trump does it and hope that he succeeds and that the world is a safer place and less people die. That's the bottom line. And if he achieves that goal, we should all be happy. Then we can talk about, if you don't like the deal, the process and what got us here. But at the end of the day, until we have something to actually discuss, it's ridiculous.
But I mean, Sean, I agree with you, except we do have stuff to discuss. The guy is giving stuff away out in the open. So, I mean, Mark, you could say he's not.
What's he giving away? What's he giving away? What's he giving away, Dan?
What name?
He's saying that we will not enforce the peace, that we will not put.
You know what? You know what? He didn't give that away because that was never going to happen because Americans will not support it.
No, listen.
He's the art of the deal. And
Dan, you know what? Dan, you know what? You know what? If he decided Americans' troops needed to go, they would. Trump has never settled on anything he says. So he's saying it because he wants to
go, Mark.
But he's saying it because he wants the Europeans to do it. And so there's a benefit to saying it, which is, hey, Europe, if you think there need to be peacekeepers in this, it's you. It's not us.
I
if you
agree
flew
that
a
Europe
person
needs
in
to
from
get
So
their
Dan, that's gaining something. That's gaining leverage over the Europeans. It's not giving anything up because A, the American forces are not going, and B, he wants to make it clear, hey, Europe, you want to be at the table? You want to be part of this after you've screwed the whole thing up? Then you need to be serious about putting forces on the ground.
Hey guys, the only thing is both of you keep talking like this. Russia invaded Ukraine. He has talked about this for 15 years. I hear you, it happened. But both of you guys keep talking like this was a real estate deal that like you guys all effed it up.
Dan,
the guy invaded.
Dan,
the guy wants more.
Yeah, and here's Trump's attitude and here's Tucker's attitude. They invaded under Obama. Then for 4 years they didn't invade.
Mark, but whatever.
And you can say they didn't invade because there was a secret deal to build a series of Trump hotels.
That, Mark.
Well, but Dan, Dan. Well, I've just
can I ask it this way? Just to put a pin in this. Let me just ask you, Dan, in all seriousness, because I get your point. I do. But I've heard this in various dinners about, there is no world in which Trump would have ever, no one who has studied him for more than like 8 seconds ever would think that he would be open to putting U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. Okay. So the idea that even if Trump didn't say it, the idea that Putin in the back of his head said, gosh, what if we get to a place where he does that is not realistic. But secondly, and more broadly, I guess the point is what is it that he has given away or done that, I get the way the world works, but is there any scenario in which you see Putin saying, oh my God, you guys are right. After 40 years, I need to give back the Donbass. I need to give back Crimea. And you know what? I should probably sign an apology letter to everybody. That's as much as I wish that was the case. And I think this is nuts that these guys went in there. There is no scenario in which he doesn't walk out of a deal with something. You forgot
the application of the next 10 years of Russian energy profits going towards rebuilding Ukraine. You forgot that too.
Yeah, guys.
All right, we got to move on. We got to move on.
A and B. I mean,
no, we don't.
No offense.
No, we don't.
Okay, so everything you just said applies to Israel and Gaza. I look forward to that conversation because you guys were telling me the opposite. We were on opposite ends.
No, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know. I don't even know what that means. We got to move on.
Why were we not going to do that?
Oh, all right. Okay. Because Trump can change his mind. Okay. I will say this before we move on, and I'll exempt
everybody.
I'll exempt myself from this because of feigned modesty. The conversation you just heard was like no other. You could watch 100 hours of cable. You could even watch the BBC. What we just had was a more real conversation about what's going on than I've heard anywhere else. And I applaud Dan and Sean. Join me, applaud them, give them some applause. You're all muted, so you can applaud as loud or quietly if you want. Thank you very much.
Oh, snapshot that.
As Elvis would say, thank you very much. All right. Yesterday, the president weighed in on 1 or 2 bills. The consensus amongst the smart set Dan and Sean, was that the Senate was going to roll the House on reconciliation. But then President Trump said, no, 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 I like one big, beautiful bill. Here's how John Thune reacted to the news that the president was undermining the Senate effort to do two bills. Roll that tape, please.
The House, as you know, is working on a different budget resolution, and we certainly wish them all the success in moving it. We will work closely with them. More power to them. What they're trying to do is get the tax piece of this done, and done quickly. And obviously, we all want to see the president's tax priorities addressed, which is making not only the tax 2017 taxes, extending them, but making them permanent. And that's certainly the priority for most, if not all, of the Republican senators.
So there's so many insane things happening in Donald Trump's Washington after 30 days that we're all just kind of accepting the insanity of the Republican Party working on two separate reconciliation plans at the same time. I had the vaguest memory, and I cannot pin this down, vaguest memory that on this program yesterday, one person touted the possibility that the House was actually about to roll the Senate. Paul, do you remember who that was? Any idea?
I have to go back to the tape to check, but I think we
All
can
right,
do
well,
that.
just play a little bit of yesterday's show. Maybe
Oh
be a
yeah,
clue.
make sure you play the whole part.
Yeah, just play a little bit of yesterday's show.
I agree, Sean, with what you say. And I generally am a believer that the Senate always rolls the House. But I heard some things yesterday that made me believe the House may actually win this fight, as amazing as that is.
I think
they
here's
might
the
actually
thing.
win.
Oh,
Happened to
so
go
if
back.
You want to know what it's like
you,
to be on cable news? That's
what'd
it.
you say? What'd you say earlier, Sean?
I said that while the conventional wisdom is that the Senate would roll the House, more and more I've talked to folks on the House Freedom Caucus and others that believe the savings that's achieved in one big bill is bigger, and conservatives will get on board with that.
You did. Unfortunately, that's not what Paul pulled. I don't know why. Anyway, Sean, is Donald Trump really now exclusively for one big beautiful bill, or is this, as my sources suggest, just a way to help Johnson run up the votes necessary to pass it, and then they're still going to play this crazy game of two tracks?
I will quote the late, great Democratic chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Charles Rangel, in a meeting where we were presenting a trade deal to him, and he looked at us and he said, "I'm with you guys till I'm not."
Are you breaking news that he once said that, or is that some like famous story?
No, I mean, it was a private meeting. We were literally like, "Chairman, we need to get you on board." And he goes, "Look, I'm with you until I'm not."
That's amazing. And your Rangel imitation is adequate.
Pretty good.
It's adequate. Good. It's better than
I mean, that's 10 years old, guys. 10 years.
Understood. And it's probably lost on some of our younger community members here. But that's a pretty good wrangle for those of you who don't know. Yes. Dan, did Trump's endorsement of the House bill yesterday mean anything except he's with them till he's not?
I mean, Sean, that was going to be my line. I think, and then JD Vance turned around and told the Senate, we're still supportive of you guys moving your bill, and maybe that you're going to be the right answer. So, by the way, I agree with. Yeah, I agree with you guys. It's a leverage play to try to help Johnson.
Yeah.
I think what's hanging over this now, as they've dilly-dallied here, is these poll numbers moving, right? Republicans are strong, for Trump and a lot of this. Democrats are strong against, and independents are starting to be about 10 to 15% against a lot of what Trump is doing. And so what is the path as a Democrat who's experienced this a few times in his career? Moderate swing districts start getting nervous and they start getting antsy. And then the base gets frustrated that the moderates are getting antsy. And you start to get this tension, this clash. We got to do something. We got to do something. Wait a sec. Like we need to alter this and sand it down and do less. We got to get something done. And so what I see happening is if you go one track, it's going to be a long time to get that bill. So the pressure now, perhaps with the Senate, is we put points on the board. Polls show Trump is slipping on immigration. He's slipping on the economy. Mark, you like to say the big things are the big things. They're not focusing on the big things. DEI and very few people thought that like Trump's whole focus was going to be Doge. It was part of what he ran on, but it was like number 5 behind inflation, the economy, immigration. Like DEI was fairly up there. But I think you see this path, and this is how Democrats got wiped out in the past when we had the trifecta.
So,
Sean, the other, go ahead.
well, I think that just to throw some more ingredients into this recipe. So you got the Senate bill. Lindsey will still move that out of the budget committee, right? And then the House will pass this other bill, which, like as I said, at the end of the day, really all you're talking about is your 302A and your reconciliation instructions. So there's a lot of fungibility in that recipe. But then Trump yesterday said that he wants to give back 20% of the DOGE savings to the American people. And don't get me wrong, he desperately, so he did this during the first term. If you ever listen to what some of the Biden, remember that Biden interview that we talked about, one of the regrets that Biden had was not putting out his name on check. Trump inherently gets that. He wants something in people's mailboxes that has a check with his name on it. So he wants to do that, and then he wants to pay down the debt. And that's complicating because they need those DOGE savings in reconciliation to extend tax cuts. So this is getting like, it's literally like taking a Rubik's Cube and saying, hey, we're going to add another side to it.
Yeah. And look, we'll be talking about this for the next few weeks because it's all coming to a head. Debt ceiling, government shutdown, reconciliation process. It's all coming to a head. Yesterday, the Washington Post reported that Pete Hegseth plans to look for significant cuts in the Pentagon budget. That was inevitable, and it's a good idea, right? You shouldn't, as Newt Gingrich said, you don't want to be a cheap hawk. You want to protect America, but the best way to protect America is to spend our defense dollars wisely. So that's a good sign, but it will divide the party because there's some Republicans who just say no, not a dollar should come out of the Pentagon budget. And then the other thing is Trump took off the table again for now. Again, he can change his mind. Medicaid cuts.
No. See, again.
Yes, I know. I understand. He walked it back, and he could just mean I won't do any damage to the actual program.
Right.
You can find savings. I understand. But it seems to me the party is going to have to come to terms with all this because there's not going to be enough deficit reduction for people who want a lot of deficit reduction because they aren't going to deal with the entitlement programs in a serious way.
Yeah, see, Mark, I'm of the mind,
to
just to be clear, I'm of the mind that this is a setup, meaning in a good way, meaning they're gonna that they've come to him and said, let's just take raw numbers. There's $100 in Medicare and Medicaid. We think we can get $30 of savings. There's at least 15 of waste, but we can tinker with these other formulas to get to the 30, but we're going to call it waste, fraud, and abuse and inefficiencies. So they're giving themselves cover to do what they need to do. I believe that they will go in and make some reforms and call them that.
Folks, I never read the chat, but I just noticed somebody wrote eyes glazing over. Sean just said one of the most important things ever said on this program. If you didn't hear it, you hit rewind. Sean just decoded what's going to happen.
And I think here's why that's important. When you get rid of condoms, $40 million of condoms from Mozambique, bunch of men in Mozambique and women suffer the consequences, right? When you take what's 8% of the military budget, which is about $900 billion a year, reportedly, we don't know what part of it is, right? You're talking about $100 billion. Two biggest military bases, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, swing state. Number 4, Fort Benning in Georgia. You're going to start touching real people in real communities. They are talking about Medicaid and Medicare, right? As the Trump base becomes more of a working class base, Medicaid's a big damn deal to people. It is not insignificant that Josh Hawley of Missouri, a lot of Medicaid recipients, came out and said, we should not do this. Chuck Grassley of Iowa, a state with a lot of Medicaid recipients and also Medicare, a lot of older people there, said, we shouldn't be doing this. The problem becomes you're attempting to do this to pay for tax cuts. So for Democrats, this is the first set of openings. Independents are not happy that you're not focused. You're now starting to talk about real programs that are going to hit real people, and it's going to hit part of the Trump base and the Trump coalition, and this is an opening.
And so I just two things on this. First, I want to compliment Dan on the proper use of Fort Benning and Fort Bragg. Thank you. Secondly, I will just say this. Anybody who has served in the military will never say, I mean, like the amount of waste is unreal.
Oh, I agree.
so there's a difference between hitting bone, hitting weapon systems, munitions, things like that. I mean, in fact, that's probably the biggest problem is that the priorities are backwards. that,
Correct.
when it
But
comes
Trump
to
said we're not going to touch the nuclear arsenal. We're not going to touch drones. We're not going to touch new weapons. I mean, again,
Great.
he's taken off the table.
Plenty to do. So one thing Dan said, you said that Doge is defining the administration to a greater extent than anyone thought. And therefore, to the extent Doge is not handled well in terms of PR, it's a potential problem. We don't see any public indication that Musk is being guided by the White House communications team about what to say. Maybe it's happening, maybe it's happening behind the scenes. So here's a clip from last night, the focus group we did with some Gen Zers talking about Musk and Doge. Play 104, please. Okay, super interesting. Okay, super interesting. I'll say one or two words. Tell me, and noun, adjective, whatever you want. One or two words. When you think Elon Musk, what do you think? Antonio.
I mean, if I had to break it down, probably three would come up, which would
Yeah.
be impulsive, reckless, and unqualified.
All right. Andrea, one or two or three words. When you think of Elon Musk, what do you think about?
Innovative and ambitious.
Okay. Cassandra?
I'm struggling to think of one. I think that ambitious is a good one, but I don't super mean it in a positive way when we're talking about this.
Okay. Steffi?
I would say entrepreneur,
Mhm.
but at the same time, also kind of like too spread out.
Okay. Evan?
So Andrea took mine, but innovative and
Yeah.
just creative.
Yeah. So you watch the whole focus group on our YouTube channel. They had mixed feelings about him, but a lot of them felt he was unqualified for what he's doing. So Sean, if you were the White House press secretary, just hypothetically, would you say to the president, hey, we need to work on Musk's image? We talked about the Hannity interview being an attempt to kind of rehab that, but do they need to spend more time making Musk more popular if he's going to be so front and center?
in a perfect world, I would say, sure, have him do some sit downs, a la what he did. But two things that I think are important. Number one, Elon Musk is not the kind of guy. I mean, really successful people, in my experience, don't tend to sit down and say, I want to hear what you have to think about my image. They became successful largely, and especially disruptor billionaire types like that. I've noticed this over the last decade. There's a trait among them, which is for most of their life, they were told, no, this will never work. And it's because of that that ethos of who they are, that they're not going to be the soft sell kind of guy that sits down. That's usually like the second generation of wealth. So that's number one. Number two is there's a difference in these polls where I get it that like a lot of the folks, maybe some independents and definitely folks on the left don't like it. But where the White House takes comfort is the base loves this stuff. And that's primarily what they really care about. So I don't, sure, could you do one or two more interviews? Maybe. But at the end of the day, it's also like, you don't know what you're going to get. I mean, Elon's not the kind of guy that says, hey, let's murder board this and go over the talking points. He's the kind of guy that says, what time's the interview start? And I'm going to sit down.
But that's the problem. I mean, Elon is an innovator. Elon is a businessman. He does have a little bit of a God complex, which is what most super successful people have. I mean, and I even wrote yesterday, like, it's the Uber playbook, right? Which is like, we'll bust some laws and rules. But like, so what? Because the end product, cutting spending, right, is popular. And I think what you're beginning to see is there does, and I've thought, because the early polls showed he was really popular, that like maybe the country is willing to be okay with this. It seems they're not, that people don't associate him as an expert in this, and they don't like how he's going about it. And again, to me, the problem becomes, I agree with you, Sean, the base loves it. And that is important because the base will scare the moderates. If we cross the base, we have a problem. But what starts to happen is when you see independents running 15 points against something and Democrats unified, anyone who's coming up is going to start to say, I have a problem. And if this hardens and Musk keeps doing this through the end of the year, it starts to look like Musk is running the government. And that is not good for Trump.
Dan, you know this from your background, Mark, obviously, and I'll just say that like the White House, it doesn't live in a vacuum. They are getting
I got it.
No. I know. I'm saying this for the folks that like, I know there's a bunch of public polls that come out, right? The White House is privy to a lot of private polling and data and analytics and things like this. They are getting told this is working, this isn't working, this is strong, this is weak, this is good. So it's not like I guess my point in all this is they're not sitting there in a vacuum going, gosh, it's good that we just figured out this. They know what's working, what's not. And of all people, Elon is a very data analytics driven guy. And that is something that I think they could show him and say, hey, look, they love it. You watched his tweet this morning and he said he started to compliment federal workers, right? So there's no question in my mind that Elon's initial attack, I should say, on federal workers, like they're all bad and all evil and USAID sucks and all this stuff, clearly wasn't going over well with everybody, right? And so he has clearly started to soften that by saying, not all people are bad. In fact, some of these guys are really good. And I mean, like, that's clearly a sign that some of this data is coming through.
All right, guys, we got to get to questions in a second. So again, if you want to in the conversation, raise your hand. Literally rapid round, like one phrase. Dan, you've never been to CPAC probably, right?
I have not.
Would you like to come with me?
CPAC is not exactly what it once was, but it's got an incredible roster of speakers this year, as it always does. So, Dan, what is the closest thing your party has to CPAC?
The Congressional Black Caucus Annual Legislative Conference. Everybody goes and everybody has to kiss the ring and everybody speaks. I mean, we don't have a comparison, but that's the closest.
But wasn't Netroots back in the day? Netroots was kind of like that, right?
Yeah, but that was 20 years ago.
No, I know. But I'm just saying you did. It fizzled.
Well, and Center for American Progress at one point in the Clinton Hillary's era was like a hot thing. And, you know, the
answer is it doesn't exist.
That's my point.
All right. Welcome in, sir. Ukrainian American with opinion is a tantalizing lower third here.
I knew I'd get your attention.
Tell us your name, where you are, what's on your mind, please.
My name is Daniel. I'm from Charlotte. We just moved here just a few years ago. So it's actually two things. I have an opinion on the Ukrainian thing, but also on the Democrats and them being blinded on not wanting to change their party. They are literally, we're originally from California. We moved from California along with my whole family and a bunch of other people. People are moving in droves. If Democrats don't see this as a problem, they're going to lose. They're going to continue losing. This is a huge thing where everyone here in Charlotte, I'm working on a house right now, everybody here is moving from New York and California and all these states. Why? Because the schools, because the politics, because the prices, because of all the policies of Democrats, you know? So it's so commonsensical, and I think if they keep not seeing it, it's going to be a big problem for them in the future.
Yeah.
And
okay, go ahead. Your Ukraine issue. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so I'm Ukrainian. My family moved here in 1990, actually, after the wall fell. It was still Soviet Union at that time. But we're from a little town called Chernovtsi. So I was already born here in America. But I think the thing that like Americans really don't understand is it's not necessarily a Ukraine and Russian thing. It's very sad because we're all Slavic people. Like here in America, we're all together. Like my wife, for instance, she's Belarusian, you know? Our kid, we have two children. They're both Ukrainian and Belarusian. And I just think Ukraine did make a huge mistake. I think anybody that you talk to would say it's commonsensical that Russia would have a problem with Ukraine going into NATO. Anybody you talk to. And I think the fact that Ukraine even thought that that was an option is crazy, you know? And even when, so I went to go visit in like 2019, and you keep hearing Ukraine is democracy, Ukrainian democracy. I went to visit Ukraine. I mean, it's a stretch to call it democracy. They might have democracy, but there's a lot of underpinnings that it's not great. I was very sad when I went to go visit my home country. It's beautiful, but people live in utter poverty in a lot of areas, and there's just a lot of problems, you know. And I think, the sooner we can resolve this war, the better. And I just feel like what Europe was pushing for was not realistic. And there was no solution ever in that sense where Ukraine would join NATO or anything like that. I think it might be different with the European Union, but I feel like this was going to be the ultimate outcome no matter what, basically. You know what I mean? Like, it was very unrealistic.
Yep. Thank you for that. Sean.
I guess this goes back to the conversation we're having with Dan, and I just want to, I'm trying to make sure I'm tracking with what you're saying, but like, do you agree that realistically there is no end to this conflict without some degree of land going, like Russia having that and accepting that as like, in other words, there's no way that there's a full on end of war that doesn't involve Russia walking away with something that they didn't have at the beginning.
Basically, there's no way to end this with Russia giving back any of that land. I mean, I think that's a given. You know, I think Russia will keep.
I mean, yeah, and that's where, again, I think that like what we all want, like I think that we can all acknowledge that Russia bad. Russia, you know, did not do this right. But I think there's also an acknowledgement that it's not going, any realistic end of this war does not have Russia not picking up some piece of land. And that's where I go, I get it. It's not what I think Trump just walks into this and says, he stops like this ridiculousness of like, we're all going to sit around a big table. And I've been to enough of these meetings in China. We used to call them SED, Strategic Economic Council. We all come out with our PowerPoints and talk about stuff, and then nothing ever happens. And I think Trump looks at this from a business standpoint and says, let's cut the BS. Let's get into the deal. If you can get this, will you end the war or will you walk away?
To be honest, I don't even think it's a business standpoint. I just think he's literally looking at this at a very realistic standpoint. I think he looks at the previous administrations and all of Europe, and I feel like that's why he's not even bringing them along, is because what they were pushing for is so unrealistic. It's so not going to happen. Russia would never allow that to happen. You know what I mean? You know, put yourself in Russia's situation. If you were in charge of Russia, you were born in Russia, you would never let that happen. You know, and I can see that as a Slavic person. I'm Ukrainian. I want to be a part of Europe. I love Europe, you know, and I want that for my people. But yet, like, it's just unrealistic. Our ties go back for centuries. Like, it's more complicated than just like, oh yeah, just leave Russia and come along. You know what I mean? Like, it's very complicated.
Dan.
Yeah, I mean, this is awesome to hear this. I mean, your opinion is incredibly insightful. So are you, big picture then, so far, we've been going back and forth, the three of us here. Are you satisfied with the last 72 hours of how this is going, or do you have some concerns? Or
realistically, I think it's probably the best way that it could happen. I mean, how else, like, what can you point at specifically where you're like, it could be better here? Yes, if someone was a little more open or something. We also have to, I just feel like we have a problem in America of like not seeing it from the other perspective. You know what I mean? Like, you have to look at it from the Russian perspective. And I feel like it's always like shut down because I look at it from the Russian perspective because I have that history, you know? And every time anyone says it from the Russian perspective, they're like, that's Russian talking points. Just because it's a Russian talking point, it doesn't mean it's wrong. You know, that's their perspective, you know, and you have to respect that and kind of deal with that. You know, it's not like they can't get anything, you know, it's very complicated.
It is complicated. Thank you for coming in and sharing all that. We're going to move just because we got lots of hands up today, but thank you for coming in. Really appreciate it.
By the way, can I just make one quick point on Ukraine that I can't help but say, because I feel like there is a part of me, we got to go back to I think it's the 1990s. We made a deal with Ukraine that if they gave up their nukes, we would have their back. If I were Ukraine, I can't believe they gave up that talking point. And I mean, frankly, from a U.S. and just so everyone on the thing doesn't misunderstand what I'm saying, we made a deal with them. And I still believe that we need to have their back, because we said, if you disarm and you get rid of your nukes in return from us all reducing nuclear weapons, we will have your back. And they should have kept that up. They blew the talking point.
Yeah. All right. We're going to shift from
someone with Professor Kenny's reminding us it's the Budapest Memorandum. Thank you.
Someone's label as Ukrainian American with a point of view to Patty, who was fired by Elon. Patty, welcome in. Tell folks where you are. Sorry you were fired. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So I'm in Philadelphia. Go Birds. I was at the parade on Friday, and then that's when the Department of Transportation started terminating all of their employees. So Sean Duffy had a town hall to meet us at 9 a.m. to like introduce himself, and then by 11 a.m. they were sending out the probationary employee terminations that just said we were fired based for performance, and that was really false for I think the majority of us. 2 weeks prior, I guess actually like a week prior, they had asked for all the division heads and everything to give us a list of the probationary employees. This list was going to somebody. We don't know. I don't know who. And then they asked for a 200-character justification as to why that position and that person should exist still. And then that's again sent elsewhere to someone who reviewed it. And I think it has resulted in, I think there are thousands of probationary employees that have been,
Patty,
in my view, illegal terminated. Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want for everyone on the chat to understand this. When you say, can you explain what a probationary employee is so people understand? Because it's not somebody who was like, you know,
Yes, it's
did a
fancy.
bad thing,
Sorry.
you did a bad thing and it's on probation. Can you explain what that means?
No. So a probationary employee is somebody who has either less than a year's worth of service in the federal government. So you're in this time period where you don't have as many rights as a someone who's been there for a year, or it can be someone who has moved laterally to a different classification or has been promoted. So someone could be in a position for 5 years and serve their probationary period in that position. But if they get promoted to a more competitive position, they may get placed back in a probationary period. And then again, they're at risk.
Patty, we're all concerned and we want to hear about, what you're going to do now and whether you're okay, whether there's anything we can do, but let's just do some basics. What did you do for the Department of Transportation? How long did you work there doing it?
So I worked actually in the Federal Transit Administration. I feel like so for 6 months. I started in August. It took me like 6 to 8 months to get the job, like just going through USA Jobs because like USA Jobs is terrible. But so I was looking for the job longer than I had it. But I was a civil rights officer, which will probably get me some flames in the chat. I don't know. But
Don't worry about
but
the
I
chat.
basically
Patty,
but
never
I
read the chat.
basically never read the chat. But I basically helped with like civil rights compliance, so like Title VI, and then also with ADA. So like if my favorite example of kind of like where my job would be important is with if a like disabled veteran with a service dog, they tried to get on to a bus or a train or something, and the operator said, "No, we don't allow dogs." Like that's illegal. Like you have to allow the service dog.
Right.
So because it's a medical device. So that's kind of where I would be in. Is like, no, you have to do that.
Patty, is this the first time you've worked in government?
So I've kind of been in and out of government, but I have never been in the federal government. So I worked for as an AmeriCorps volunteer, and then I worked with a consulting firm called Guidehouse beforehand.
And are you an attorney?
So they like no, maybe one day. I'm applying to law school now after this, but maybe.
Do you want the two-way community to help you get a job, or are you pretty set on going to law school?
I think I'm pretty set on going to law school now, but I would just say like there are so many probationary employees that are being let off right now, and I think it's really devastating, the stories that I've seen. I've seen at least 2 pregnant women who have been terminated for performance reasons, and now they don't have like healthcare coverage as they're about to give birth. There was one woman who was called back from her FMLA to get fired. So I think that what's going on now is just like indiscriminate.
Are the 2 pregnant women friends of yours, or you've just heard about them?
I've seen them and they've been vocal about it, because I feel like, so for the most part, another Fed thing, as you're a federal employee, you're bound by the Hatch Act. So you can't really speak out because you could potentially face penalties. So now we're not feds.
And were you
for
getting
political
were you and the 2 pregnant people, were they getting government health insurance until they were fired?
Yeah.
So isn't there, someone put in the chat, I happened to glance at the chat, I never read it. Isn't there COBRA for federal employees?
Yes. They will be getting like COBRA and everything, but now like obviously we didn't get any severance, right? Like
can I just ask that? Like that's what I was wondering. So you get this, just can you walk through real quick the process? So you have a meeting or they send you an email, and then what happens? They say tomorrow you're done, or how does that, do you just get to like use out your leave, or what happens?
I was hybrid. Anybody saying that no, everybody is like, federal employees are remote. We're not remote. So sorry, it's just a chat. Don't look at the chat.
Don't look at the chat. Never look at the chat, Patty.
So yes. So they
like were you frog marched out of the building?
No, I was not. I was actually off that day because I was at the Eagles parade. And then I got a notification from my boss via email, like, hey, can you call me? And I was like, oh shoot, okay. So then I called and he told me that they were letting go all the probationaries. And again, like I've been through a reduction in force in the private sector. This has been fundamentally different these past few weeks, where we are getting HR emails constantly to us that just say we're unproductive and we suck. So
what do they really say?
They are like FAQs, right? So they'll send us FAQs about the fork in the road. And the FAQs will be like, oh, like people have expressed ethics concerns, whether you can have 2 jobs at once, like you can get these federal benefits. Can you get another job? Yes, of course you can. You can work 2 jobs. And like that to us is like not according to our ethics trainings, you can't be employed in both places.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of people were confused. FAQs like that, or FAQs like, what should I do next? Oh, well, we want to move you from your unproductive public sector position into a productive private sector position. That is verbatim what the FAQs are saying.
Dan,
could you, by the way, could you do us a favor? Can you PDF them and send them to us?
I do have them.
Be careful about that.
I don't want to.
But okay, so let me ask this. Okay,
yeah, Patty, I'd be really careful doing that stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
But okay, can I just get back to the so walk us through the sequence? You get an email and all these FAQs that run through scenarios, etc. What is your current status? Did they say, Patty, this is a 2-week notice, or is it, Patty, you're fired today, and however much leave you have, we'll pay you out?
No, it was my leadership was really fortunate. Some teams notified their employees as soon as they could at 11 a.m. like, hey, you're going to be locked out by 3 to 5. And this was on Friday. And my leadership, I was at the parade. I got back, so I was able to download performance data and stuff like that. But some teams didn't know. Yeah. My boss obviously emailed me out because he was like, you're getting fired. I'm sorry. So at 3 to 5, they were sending out notifications and shutting down access. And I was kind of waiting. I was like, okay, all right. Like 5 p.m. went by, 6 p.m. went by, 7 p.m. went by, 8 p.m. comes by. Elon couldn't even fire me on time. And so at 8 p.m. on Friday, on Valentine's Day, I got my termination letter that just said, you've just been fired based on performance. And I had never had any bad performance review at all. But it's the only way to terminate a probationary employee is through performance, because if they have to do a reduction in force, they have to go to Congress and they have to ask for approval, and then they have to give us advance notification, and they don't want to do that.
So Patty, would you consider, I'm not offering this, I'm just like a hypothetical, would you consider being part of a lawsuit saying you were illegally fired?
Yeah, because I feel I've never been fired in my life. Now I'm like, do I have to say that I was fired on applications? I was Valentine's Day massacred.
Well, I mean, it's hard to hear some of this, Patty. I mean, I'm sorry. I having been in the private sector where I've had to execute layoffs and be a part of a senior team, and it's hard, right? Yeah. It is a hard thing to do. There's people's lives and careers and families that are impacted. But sometimes companies or, government feels like they need to do certain things. And whether somebody, what's the circumstances in their personal life, it's hard. People can have sick children or relatives or be pregnant or whatever. And it's gut wrenching, right? The number of people in the private sector have gone through this. It's just really hard. I think what is just kind of, makes me angry and is outrageous is just, as you say, the justifications they gave, it's being reported of poor performance reviews when in fact that was not the case, is just ridiculous. And usually when you do layoffs, if the goal is cost savings, you don't go to the cheap people who are new. You go to the expensive people who are at the, in the middle management and above, and you say, do we have someone who we can replace them with that is significantly cheaper or can do 2 jobs or whatever? And this is where, as you say, they're just indiscriminately spraying out, coming up with, reasons that are not true or appear allegedly are not true. And it's not a way to run a business or government. And I think this is where the public looks around and says, what's he doing? Now, I agree. Most people don't have any sympathy for government employees, and they, aren't going to feel bad because they've been through layoffs themselves. But I'm sorry, it's a crappy way to do stuff.
Patty, anything we can do for you?
No, I think just spread the word for probation. I think the media coverage for this has been really difficult just to watch. One, because obviously, like you said, the public opinion, I think, is against federal employees. I don't think that we can speak out for ourselves and the services that we offered. The first question everyone asks is, were you in the office? How were you remote? There's so many talking points that have just been brought up and kind of ran with. And
Patty,
then we can't defend ourselves.
What's happening today, if you'll pardon the use of the phrase, on the streets of Philadelphia, because you and your colleagues are no longer there? What's happening that's different? Is there some
I-
veteran with a service dog who's trying to get on the train and they're being turned away and that's that? Is that what's happening?
That is possible. That could be happening right now. That could be happening on a SEPTA bus, and then the SEPTA people are like, "Who do we talk to about this?" Or the person who is doing it can't file, like, the complaint can't be routed to the right person.
Was your function entirely eliminated, or are there just fewer people doing it?
And so there's a hiring freeze right now. So for all intents and purposes, the position that I had is frozen for now. I don't know if it is eliminated, but they can't hire anyone back for it because of the freeze. So,
right. All right. Well, Patty, we appreciate you coming on. We hope you'll come back regularly and keep us updated.
Thank you. I love two-way. It's great to speak with you guys.
Thank you. If you need,
sharing.
if you need a law school letter of recommendation, Dan's really good. Dan's a really good writer. So let us know. Thank you for coming on. And again, very sorry about it.
Thank you.
Guys, anything else you want to say about Patty before I do some housekeeping?
Do some housekeeping.
All right. All right. So thanks. Two great questions. Again, lots of hand up. Sorry we didn't get to more folks. Tonight on Two-Way Tonight, great guests in our 6 o'clock regular slot. Tim Hogan. Some of you may remember Tim Hogan. And Kristen Davis. And we'll talk about the Vance speech. We'll talk about Donald Trump doing something during the day, I'm sure. Maybe we'll talk about Patty. We'll see. But join us for that. Then it's an extended version. And I want you to meet somebody now who probably most of you don't know. Herb Gotti Lorenzo recently passed away, a legend in the business. And I just want to show you Irv talking. So Paul, roll that, please.
I agree.
I want everyone to know crystal clear, I'm not like Spike Lee. I'm not like Malcolm X. No disrespect to Spike Lee, but I'm saying I'm not that kind of filmmaker that
But you are
is
making sure
is a message.
Yeah, but you are making sure that there is a conversation.
Yeah,
and
no,
that it's compelling.
with that specific episode, with
right.
what is going on in America in the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Well, longer than that, but
longer
just
than that.
But with the
longer
cameras
than that, but with the camera and the topic that's been going on, I felt this is a great opportunity.
You're just trying to, because you have to be.
So Irv, as I said, recently passed away. He was the brother of our colleague at Two-Way, Chris Gotti Lorenzo, and he was an artist and a business person and one of the central figures in the history of hip hop and R&B fusion. Incredible guy, and he had a stroke. And so what we're going to talk about at 7 tonight is his life and a little bit about his career, including with his brother Chris and Damon Dash, who some of you will know, also a legendary figure in the music history, modern history of music. And we're also going to talk about two really important issues on health. One is diabetes, which of course is closely correlated with the incidence of stroke, and how to deal with a healthy lifestyle so you don't get diabetes. And then second is, what are the signs of stroke? Stroke is one of those health crises where every second counts. And so if you or someone you love or in your office is having a stroke, knowing how to recognize that and as quickly as possible getting to the emergency room, because every second counts in terms of saving a life and saving a function. So join us again, normal time, 6 o'clock Eastern time for a regular episode, and then we'll roll right into 7, an extended version, and we'll talk about the life and the death, unfortunately, of Irv. So thank you for that. Sean, predict one line from the Vance speech. Just make it up. What's one thing he's going to say to CPAC?
Donald Trump is our retribution.
Dan.
Winning.
I'm going with an easy prediction. Matt and Mercedes, thank you so much for putting on this extraordinary event
come on.
year after year.
Funny.
Thank you for watching. Tonight, 6 o'clock.
Mark, can I put a
sir.
personal privilege here? Yesterday, Megan was very complimentary of all of Dan's. In my Catholic guilt set in. She was very complimentary of Dan's social media support of her. So I went out, I gave her the immediate thing, and then no retweet, no like of the tweet. And I'm just saying,
From Megan?
From Megan, I'm saying, she guilted me into it. She made Dan was so good at it.
She had a lot on her mind. If you didn't watch
I'm just saying.
If you didn't watch Megan's debut last night, I recommend that on YouTube too. First shows are really hard just because there's technical things and always a little bit of, getting used to it. Megan and her guests were spectacular.
I'll give her a little break, but I'm just saying, I got the
next week.
If she's
not retweeting you next week, there'll be, you know what? We'll put her on probation. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at 6 tonight, and the three of us will be back.
Two-way probation.
Exactly. The three of us will be back in 23 hours tomorrow for the week's final episode of what Dan likes to call
the morning
meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
It was awesome today.
Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you at 6.